All right, today we're cracking open an intelligence briefing. And it's on a war we've been fighting for centuries, a war we honestly thought we were winning, but one where the front lines are, well, quietly starting to collapse. This is the unfinished conquest, the war on infectious disease.
So just take a look at this. On the left, you've got the 19th century. It's just this chaotic, brutal landscape of death. You've got cholera, smallpox, yellow fever, diseases that would just sweep through and wipe out huge chunks of the population every few years. And then you look to the right, and it's practically a flat line. This right here is arguably the single greatest victory in the history of our species. So the question is, how on earth did we do it? How did we manage to tame the #1 killer of humanity?
Well, the answer is probably not what you're thinking. You see, the first and honestly the most decisive phase of this whole conquest, it happened way before we ever invented wonder drugs like penicillin.
Now, what's really fascinating here is when that death rate just plummets. And look, it's not in 1950, when antibiotics became common. The huge drop actually starts way back around 1890. So, why? Well, it was things like water purification, sewage disposal, better nutrition, and pasteurization. Our first great weapons weren't pills. They were pipes, public health rules, and civil engineering. We didn't win by attacking the diseases head-on. We just cleaned up the battlefield, making it almost impossible for the enemy to even survive.
All this incredible success, it led to this really powerful sense of optimism. I mean, as this quote shows, we started to genuinely believe we had won, that the age of plagues and epidemics was finally over. And that feeling of victory, that myth that the war was already won, well, that's what set us up for the shock that was right around the corner.
Okay, so while the engineers were busy cleaning up our cities, a totally different kind of revolution was happening inside the lab. For the first time, we were finally starting to crack the enemy's code and build a real strategic playbook for how to fight them. You know, the first rule of war is to know your enemy. And for thousands of years, we didn't even really know what we were fighting. But then, in the 1880s, a guy named Robert Koch gave us this, his postulates. This was a clear, repeatable protocol to prove which specific microbe was causing which specific disease. For the first time ever, we could put a name to the face of the enemy.
And once you can identify the enemy, well, then you can start to map out their strategy. And that brings us to this, the chain of infection. This is basically the tactical map for pretty much every infectious disease out there. It needs the bug itself, the pathogen, a place for it to live and multiply, called a reservoir, some way to get from A to B, which is transmission, and finally, a susceptible host. It's a simple cycle, but it's incredibly powerful.
And this one simple idea, man, it became the absolute core doctrine of all of public health. You don't actually have to go on some crazy mission to eradicate every single virus or bacteria on Earth. To stop a disease in its tracks, you just have to be smart. You just have to break one single link in that chain. So this gives us our whole arsenal of tactics, right? We can go after the pathogen itself using things like antibiotics, or we can hit the reservoir, like purifying the water that cholera lives in. We can block transmission through something as simple as washing our hands or as complex as quarantine. Or we can make the host an unsuitable target through immunization. 4 links in the chain, 4 strategic opportunities to attack.
Okay, so that's the theory. Let's see how this doctrine actually plays out in the real world. We're going to declassify 2 case files from the front lines. One was a stunning, total victory, and the other, a pretty sobering failure. On the left, you've got smallpox, a disease we beat so completely that it now only exists in 2 high-security labs on the entire planet. That's a total win. And on the right, malaria, a disease we tried to wipe out back in the 50s, but it came roaring back, even stronger than before. So what gives? Why the completely different outcomes?
Well, when you look at the strategic analysis, it's pretty clear. Smallpox was, in a way, the perfect target. It only infected humans, so there was no animal reservoir for it to hide in. Its symptoms were super obvious, so it was easy to track, and we had a fantastic, long-lasting vaccine. But malaria? It was the total opposite. The mosquitoes and the parasites that cause it adapted. They developed resistance to our weapons. The funding dried up before the job was done. And as the disease faded for a bit, people lost their natural immunity, which made the counterattack even deadlier. The big takeaway here? Hubris is a killer. Partial measures just give the enemy time to adapt and come back stronger.
But right when the victory over smallpox seemed to prove we were on top of the world, a new enemy hit the scene. And this one, it didn't play by any of the old rules. It exploited our own biology against us in a way that was just terrifying.
You have to remember, before the 1980s, that whole myth of conquest thing was at its absolute peak. We really thought we had this problem solved. And then AIDS happened, and it was just a brutal reality check for everyone. It shattered that shield of optimism and proved that microbes weren't defeated. They were just regrouping. 35 million. That's the number of people infected with HIV around the world. A pandemic on a scale that was supposed to be a thing of the past, something you only read about in history books. It was a profound shock to the entire system.
And here's the thing that made HIV so incredibly different. Think of it like a deep cover agent inside a spy agency. It's a special type of virus that literally writes its own code directly into our DNA. And what does it target? Our T4 cells, the absolute commanders of our immune system. So when our body tries to fight off an infection, it accidentally activates the virus, turning its own generals into enemy factories. It's a biological masterstroke.
The fight against HIV taught us a hard lesson. Brilliant science isn't always enough. People's behavior, communication, and public trust were just as critical. And that brings us right up to today, where our greatest vulnerability, it isn't some new supervirus. It's us. The real battle is now for that same public trust.
Okay, so let's talk about herd immunity. The crucial thing to get here is that it's not just about protecting yourself. When enough of the population is vaccinated, it creates this firewall. It protects the most vulnerable people in our society. Babies too young to be vaccinated, cancer patients, the elderly. It's a collective defense, a civic shield.
But then, in 1998, a crack appeared in that shield. A single, completely fraudulent study, which was later retracted, falsely linked the MMR vaccine to autism. It has been totally debunked over and over again, but the damage was done. It planted the seed of doubt that has grown into a widespread erosion of trust in one of our most powerful public health tools.
And you want to see the consequences? Here they are. Measles. A disease the U.S. declared eliminated back in the year 2000. It's back. These outbreaks, everywhere from Disneyland in California to Amish communities in Ohio, are popping up in places where vaccination rates have dipped just below that herd immunity level. The firewall has been breached.
Look, measles is the warning shot. It's the canary in the coal mine. Because it's just so darn contagious, it is always the first disease to pop back up the second that civic shield starts to fail. Its return is a blinking red light that our collective defenses are getting weaker. So this all brings us to our modern defense system. This idea of eternal vigilance really needs three keys to work: constant surveillance to spot new threats, the ability to quarantine to contain them, and widespread immunization to protect everyone. But here's the kicker. Its success doesn't just depend on biology. It absolutely requires political will, resources, and most importantly, public trust.
Which brings us to the final assessment of this entire intelligence briefing. Despite all of our incredible progress, despite everything we've learned, infectious diseases are far from being conquered. This war, it's unfinished.
We have the science, we have the strategy, we have the tools. But victory in a century seems to depend less on our technology and more on something way more fragile: trust. Trust in science, trust in our institutions, and honestly, trust in each other. So the final question this briefing has to leave us with is this: is that trust strong enough for the war that's still to come?